Boker Tov, Shavua Tov, Sorot Tovo. Today's daf is daf Samach Aleph in Baba Basra. Begin the fourth parak in Baba Basra, as we learn for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael and Surim Batzar B'Shivya. May everybody have a refuah shlema. May everybody come home safely. It says the Mishnah, Hamochas Abayis. Now today you got lawyers and they delineate everything, and you have surveys and all kinds of stuff to prove exactly what you bought. But in the olden days, person sold a house and he had some other structures attached to the house. And the question is, what's included, what's not? I sell you my house, sell you my apartment. So if he sells a house, he does not necessarily include the side room. The yitzia is a strange word. We're going to talk about what that yitzia means. Like a side room, a porch, a balcony. We'll see what the different interpretations of that is, but it's basically a chamber or a room of some sort. But it's like an attachment to the house. It's not really part of the house. So if he sells a house, doesn't automatically sell the yitzia. So if there's a fight, breaks out and says, "What did you sell me? Isn't this part of the house?" No, that's not part of the house. So even though that side room opens up into the house, might be a balcony, a porch of some sort. We'll see. Let's say there's a room inside, meaning in the back of the house. This is more like a garage or a storage room, like a storage room. People have these sheds that they store stuff. Like here, we got a couple of sheds out here. Is that part of the house? If they sold this building, would that go with it also? So he says that no, a side room or a room that's separate from the house. It's used for storage. People, maybe it's a safe room, like a lockbox. They kept stuff in there. We'll see. Rashram points out that's usually made for storing money or valuables or something. It's not a house it's not a room in which they normally live. It's more of a storeroom. So if you sell the house, you don't include the side room, nor do you include this storage room, we'll call that, which is on the back of the house. Below Esagag. Also, the roof is not included. Listen to that. The roof is not included. Right? This man sheish lamaka, if it's got a fence around it, that could be a separate structure. Today we see that here in Israel, where when you live in an apartment and you own your apartment, what do you own? You own your apartment. You have a share in the pros door, in the hallways and stuff like that. And in most cases, you have a share of the roof. It's a common property. Some cases, though, no. A lot of older properties in town that the roof is owned by the person who lives right below the roof. Depends on the shituf habayit and how that works. How the what the takanon was, how they built it, and how they bought it. So he says over here, these things are not included. The side room is not included. The storage room is not included, nor is the roof if it's got a separate fence or a wall around it, a maka gavah sarat bacham, then it's got like a separate structure. Because then it's used for different purposes. Normally you might say, well, a roof is just, what do you do on a roof? You store stuff there, you put you hang out things to dry or whatever, fruits to dry. But if it's got a fence around it, maybe they use it to play ball, and maybe they use it for some other purpose. So he says that's not included. All these things are not included. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, if this side room has like a doorway, looks like a doorway, a tzuras pesach, like the form of a door. It's got two side posts and a lintel on top. Even if it's not 10 tvachim, in other words, apparently he's going on the case of the gag. If the roof has got sort of like an entranceway, what they call it tzuras pesach, even though it doesn't have, even though it's not 10 tvachim high, this ma'akeh, it's not considered sold. It's pretty hard to imagine this. That if it's got a fence around it, then it's considered like an independent structure, an independent piece of property. But if not, then it's sort of included in the house. It's not independent of the house. But Rav Yehuda says if it's got a tzuras pesach, even though it's not 10 tvachim high in a macher, so it's pretty hard to imagine what the tzuras pesach is. If it's not 10 tvachim high, it's not very big. So how do you have a tzuras pesach? Could be that it's a very low thing, but it's got like a doorway. Some see the doorway is bigger than the fence. It's taller than the fence. No. This could be a roof. It could be this. It could be it's open on top. It's open on top. It's a roof, so it's open on top. The question is, does it have a fence or a wall around it? So he said, if it's got a doorway, looks like a doorway, even if it's not 10 tvachim high, then it's also considered a separate independent structure because it looks that way. It looks like an investment. So you have here a side room. And you have what we call a storage room, a cheder, in the back. and we have a roof. All those things, if the roof has either a fence or it's got a tzuras Pesach, then they're not included in the house. Now, before we turn to the Gemara, take a look at Samach Gimel, 2 pages from here, or Samach Daled rather, Samach Daled, 3 pages from here. And here you have a case where the Mishnah just goes on. In other words, they split it up this way, and the Mishnah says below. It said below it, lowest above us. This is a continuation. When you sell a house, you don't sell the pit that goes along with, let's say, in the yard around the house, there was a pit, or it's a dus. The bore and dus is the same thing. They're both for water, like a well, but the bore is just dug out, and the dus has got like stones in there. It's lined with stones, so it's more of a permanent structure. But they're not included with the sale. I sell you the house. I'm selling you this apartment, and what's included? You know what? The side room's not included. The storage room's not included. The roof is not included, nor is the bore included. Even though he wrote in it, I'm selling you my property, umkavaruma, in its depth and in its height, that's not included because that's considered separate. And then we have Rabbi Kiva's famous Rabbi Kiva says that the seller keeps for himself the pit or the dus, whatever, like the well. But since he sold the property and the property is the land included in the house, he's got to find a way to get there, take a helicopter to get to his own bore because he sells it generously. So we see Rabbi Kiva's famous sheet. We've had this Mishnah in several places already. That Rabbi Kiva says he sells it generously, so he includes even the path leading up the bore. So he's got to find a way to get there. He's got to buy it back. Come say a person's not that generous. Rabbi Kiva, this mantra melachutz me'elu. Rabbi Kiva's motive. He says, listen, I'm selling the house and I'm excluding the bore. Right? I'm excluding me'elu. He doesn't have to find a way to get there because he's excluded it specifically. Let's say he kept the house and he just sold the bore. So Rabbi Kiva says, the buyer does not have to buy it. By selling you the pit, obviously since I sell things generously, I'm including the pathway leading up to the pit. But says, no, person not that generous. I sold you the pit. You have to find a way to get there, take a helicopter or purchase from me the rights to access it. So I mentioned the Mishnah here because it's really, some have the girsa that it's vilo es abor velosis. Sometimes it's really a continuation of the Mishnah. And then the next Mishnah afterwards is also going to go on. But that next Mishnah talks about if you sell the house, at least starts with hamocher es habayis, what is included, what's not included. All these Mishnayos are talking about that what's included, what's not. But this Mishnah that I just referred to in Samach Dalet, it says below us, and it's mamash a continuation of this Mishnah. So we'll see now the Gemara, and we'll see why we had to mention the Mishnah from Samach Dalet in a minute. My Yitziyah. So what is this side room that we talk about? A balcony, a porch, a side room. What are we talking about? Hachatagimo here in Bavel, they said that it's apta. Now apta is the same word we had on the other day. It was actually on yesterday's daf that we finished off on Friday. Which means like a balcony. Okay, like a balcony, but it could be a closed balcony, like a porch. Here everybody has these porches and then they close them off, make them into a room. He says that's what it is. Rabbi Yosef Amar Bitka Chalila. It's also a porch, but it's got holes in it, meaning it's got lattice work. It's more open than the Yitziyah. The Yitziyah might be a closed-in balcony, and the Bitka Chalila means like holy. It's got holes in it. It's got it's semi-open. It's like a porch semi-open, and that's the porch that we're speaking about. So this side room, I like to use the word side room because that fits all the different interpretations. If you say it's Yitziyah, it means it's a closed room. So okay, that's one thing that's included. That's not included because it's a side room. It has a different. We said it's not, even though it has an entrance to the house, but it's not exactly like part of the house. And if it's an open porch, if it's more of an open porch, that certainly is less likely to be included because it's not the part of the house. It doesn't have the same functions as the house because people don't do on an open porch what they do inside their house. The one who says it's ipta or apta, the one who says that it's like a closed porch, that's not sold with the house. So certainly if it's an open porch, it's not sold. It's not considered part of the house. If you say that what is the interpretation of Yitziyah, Bitka Chalila means an open porch, but an apta, a closed porch, would be sold with the house because its function is the same. You do the same thing in a closed porch as you do in your house. Rav Yosef says that this word Yitziyah, Shalosh Shemas Yeshlo, it's got three three different names for the same object. What are they? Yitzia, Tsela, Ta. All those words, Yitzia, Tsela, Ta, we'll see these are all words from either in the Chumash or in Tanakh, and they all mean the same thing. Now, we had this actually yesterday on yesterday's daf, which we saw this on Friday. In the Rashbam, about 20 lines from the top of the page, he also mentions Apta. When we mentioned Apta, yes, before the first mission on Daf Samach, Rashbam also first over there, he said that Yitzia, Tzel, and Ta are all the same thing. And now he's going to give the sources for those words, but they all refer to the same thing. It's a side room or a chamber. I mean, it's a side room if it's attached to a house. If it's not attached to a house, then it's just a chamber. What are they? So he brings psukim from Tanakh, showing either from the first Beis Hamikdash or from the Beis Hamikdash Lasad Lava, the third Beis Hamikdash that's described in Yecheskel, that's either going to be built or that some say it's going to come down from heaven fully built, with the names on it, donated by the Friedmans, this room donated by the Schwartzes. It's all going to be pre-printed on there. So what are these? Yitzia Tzal Ta Yitzia, where's the source for the word Yitzia? That means a chamber or a side room. D'chsiv Hayitzia Tachtona, the lower chamber, Chamesh Bama Rachba, has a width of 5 amos. Okay, so you see that this is in Melachim. This is referring to Shlomo Melach's Beis Hamikdash that he built. So there he called the chamber Yitzia. Sela, we see that the word Sela also means a chamber. D'chsiv Ba'atzlaos. What are these chambers? Sela, one on top of another. Shalosh. There are three stories, one chamber on top of the other. Shloshim pamim times 30 times. This is already from Yecheskel describing the Beis Hamikdash of the future. Ta, where do we find this ta, which is also we use in modern Hebrew. Ta is a box or a chamber, right? Your ta doar is your post office box, right? Ta do, right? Your ta d'chsiv, the chamber or the box, kona echad orach, is one reed in length. The reed Rashbam says is 6 amos. That's quite long. 6 amos is like 12 feet. So what the chamber was like, so it's a square, one reed by one reed. Between the chambers, chamesh amos was 5 amos. So you see over here that the ta also refers to a chamber because it's sizable. Or you could say not even from Tanakh, but from the Mishnah itself. From this Mishnah in Midos, Kosalecha, where it describes the whole length of 100 amos, the length from east to west of the Beis Hamikdash, the building itself, the Heichal, including the Kodesh Kodshim and the regular Heichal and the Ulam and the entrance area and the whole thing. He says Kosalecha. At the end, he says Kosalecha. The wall of the Heichal was 6 amos. V'hatah sheish. And the chamber was 6. That shows you and then Kosal Tashesh, and then the wall of the chamber. This is at the end in the western side of the Heichal is also 5. But the fact that he tells you the thickness of the wall is 6, and then the thickness of the chamber is 6, that shows you that the chamber is a chamber, is a room or a chamber. And then the Kosal Tas Chamesh. So you can see it from the Mishnah also. Amar Masutra, V'hu Davi Arba Amos. All these cases where we say that this Yitzia, this side room, is not included with the house, that's only if it's independent enough that it's considered significant itself. How is that? That it's 4 by 4 amos. It says Rashbam Amar Mazutra, halfway into the first of the wide line, into the first wide line, it's not the widest. It's got to have something significant. It's got to be a significant room. If it's a small closet that's not 4 by 4, then it's not included at all. So it's got to be dalet amos. It's got to be like 8 feet by 8 feet. Then it's considered a significant room, and therefore you could say that it wasn't included. I sold you the house. This is a separate structure. It's independent. But if it's not that big, even if it's called Yitzia or Ta or Tzela or whatever it's called, if it's not that big, then it's considered an aperture of the house itself, or an appendage of the house, you could say, I guess. Amar Marzutra, Budavi Abrams, Amalei Ravina Lamarzutra. So Ravina said to Marzutra, I understand it always has to be 4 by 4. The Dachta Amarna Davi Amos. According to you, it says it's got to be 4 amos by 4 amos. Elamata Gabi Bor. Now, this is the mission that we saw before in Daf Samach Dalet. What about by bor? Where you say when you sell the house, you don't include the pit with it, a well or a pit that you say over there that we just mentioned that Mishnah, that it's not that when you sell the house, you don't include the pit or the dus, which is also a pit. which has got it's it's lined with stones. Even though you wrote in the bill of sale, you wrote, I'm selling the house with its depth and height. So you might say the depth includes the pit. No, it's not included. So there also you're going to say it's not included. Does the pit have to be? Usually, many of the pits were not that big. So you can say the pit also it's got to be 4 by 4. So he says no, not necessarily. How can you compare? In the case of a house versus the pit, they have different usages. The house is made to live in, to sleep in, to eat in, to do all the things that you do in a house. The pit is made to draw water. It's a different situation. They're not the same. You can't compare them. But over here, we're talking about the side room and the house have the same tashmish, have the same usage. We're not talking about the cheder, the back room that's the storage room. We're talking about this porch, a closed-in porch, an open porch, but you use it the same way you use the house. So therefore, if it's 4 by 4, then it's an independent structure. It's not included with the house. It's not by 4 by 4 now. You have a dalet amas choshev. If it's 4 amas by 4 amas, then it's significant and it's independent on its own. If it doesn't have 4 amas, it's not significant. So the Mishnah went on. So the Gemara asks like this. I don't understand. If you say, if this cheder, and cheder means room, obviously, right? It means room. It could also be a room, a chamber. But he's talking about the one that's lifnei abayis, like lifnei mimenu, inside the house, meaning in the back of the house, like a storage room. Call that a storage room. Not a storage room like a shed where you keep junk, even where you keep chashuva stuff. It's a call it a safe, a safe room where you keep your important stuff. So the Gemara says, Mishnah said, if I sell the house, I don't sell the side room, even though the side room has similar usage to the house. And then he says that you don't sell the back room, the storage room. Also, it's not sold. The Gemara says obvious. Hashti Yitzilum is daven. If the side room is not sold, and the Yitzia, which has a similar usage as the house, it's exactly like the house. If that's not included because it's considered a separate structure, if it's 4 by 4. So cheder mi boy. So certainly, if it's a cheder, and Rashbam, the last line of the page, see the Rashbam last line of the page, cheder also shmiras mon. That's made for storing your money or assets. The aino, the ain tashmisho, and its usage is not similar to tashmishel bias. So koshkein certainly should not be sold. So what did you have to tell me that the storage room is not included? If a porch or a side room, which has the same usage as a house, is not included in the house, so certainly a storage room would not be included. The chiddush is afagav the meitzah lamitzri. Even though in the deed he circled and he showed like the area the house would be, and I had like a map there, and he showed it including that house too, that back room, the storage room. Even though he showed that within the boundaries of Roy, and in the outer boundary he included that room too, it doesn't really mean he meant to include the room. That's the chiddush. But even though the chiddush is not that this is, of course, this is a room which is not used for living and therefore should not be included with the house. But even though in the map of the house and the deed he sort of included that when he roughly drew the area of the house, still the chiddush is even though he did that, even though he drew the boundary including that storage room, it's not included. Rav Nachman, like Rav Nachman, Rav Nachman, let's say you sell a house or an apartment or a house to somebody in a big building, a gigantic building. A bira could be in a palace or a very, very large building. You sold him one house in a bira gdol in a large building. Even though he included, he showed in his rough diagram of the map of where he's getting it, even though he included the outer perimeter of the big building, he just widened the structure. In other words, they weren't exact. They weren't exact in the diagram. So it wasn't like today. I mean, I don't know how. Today, I think it's described when you buy or sell an apartment here. It has a gush and a chelkan. That's all clearly defined in the city. In America, I remember when they sold things. If I recall this correctly, I don't know. It's like now the survey would say it's exactly 130 feet from this street and bordering on this street and bordering on that. There were different ways to define exactly what you're getting. What's included, how much land is included in the property and not. So they didn't have those kind of fine-tuned ways of describing things. He had a house there. You think he built it with a permit? You think he had permits and stuff? He had a house, he had a building, he had an apartment, whatever, in a big structure. So even though he drew the map, included those things too, it doesn't necessarily include it. Again, what's included, unless he said specifically. unless he says specifically, even though he drew the boundary around it, but it doesn't mean it. Gemara says, I don't understand. What's the case? If a house is a house, or a house meaning a house or an apartment is called a house, a large building is called a bira. So pshita. So it's obvious that he didn't include that. What is Rav Nachman Amar Abu trying to teach me? You sell a house in a large building, even though you drew a picture. You in the perimeter in the deed, you sort of drew it around a diagram including the building. You don't mean to include the whole building. So what are you even talking about? What's the case? If I said I'm selling you an apartment, obviously I'm not selling you the whole building. If you call a house, or an apartment, and a big building, pshita. Buy yourself and I sold you a house. I didn't sell you the building. But it must be that maybe they call a big building also a house. So maybe he sold the whole building. Maybe this guy owned the whole building. And so how do you sell the whole building? If you call a bira, a large building, also you call that a house. So when he sold him the house, if he actually owned it, maybe he sold him the whole building. So let's read. You don't need that. Why? The ruba korle bias. Most people call an apartment or a house or a dwelling, and a building, a large building, they call a building. Some people, even the large building, they call that a house too. Now I might think they meant to include everything. So in other words, if some people call a big building a house and they call the apartment a house, how do you know what he meant to include? So I might think he sold them the whole building. Kamash Malon, since he should have said, if he wanted to sell the whole building, he should have included these words in the deed. Below Shiurus bezvine alain, and I have not left over anything in this deal, in this transaction, kadmoi for me, kadavi for me, klum. I've not left anything. If he wanted to sell the whole building, he should have said, I'm selling you this house, and nothing is left for me in this whole structure. If he didn't write that, below custom, he didn't write that, you see from me that Shiur shy that he left over something from house. Meaning, I'm only selling you this apartment, I'm not selling you the whole building. That was one thing that he said, and that's why we had the cheder mentioned in our Mishnah. Even though he drew a picture around the whole thing, he drew a line, a boundary, including the back room. A similar thing that Rav was said, let's say you sell somebody a field, in a large stretch of fields. There's many fields out there. All the fields are used for growing crops. Sold you one field in a large stretch of fields. Even though I drew the picture around, including other fields there too, I'm selling you a field among many fields. So even though I drew the picture, that was just a rough diagram, and I included maybe other fields in there too. I just drew the picture that way. It's just a rough diagram. It's not meant to be exact. Right? Again, the same question. If you call a field, and you call a stretch of fields, like a plain or a plain, Plain, or a valley that has many fields in there. If you call a field, and a stretch of fields, a pshita. Obviously, I sold you a field, I only sold you one. Pshita is like sold you a field, I didn't sell you the whole stretch of fields. The Elamai must mean to a bikanami korlasada. Maybe it means this, that they call a bika also a field. Some people call a field. Some people call a stretch of fields a bika. And some people, even a stretch of fields, will also call that a field. So the elder so how do you know you didn't sell them the whole thing? I'm selling you my field, even though there's many fields there. That's all. It's all my field. Okay, if they would measure it, if they'd be exact, that would solve the problem. But they didn't do that. Again, using today's measurements and the way we do things today, the way they're clearly defined, then you'd have it. Today, again, if you do a contract today, buying or selling, they specify the gush and the chelka, the area and the exact spot. They do it with graves today also. In graves, I think they had those markers in the old days. Today, you buy a grave spot, place to bury somebody. It also has gush and chelka exactly, and it's clearly, demarcated in the maps of the whole cemetery. Same thing with houses. You don't have to say it's on this street and it's 50 meters removed from here and 20 meters on this side. It's marked with the gush and the chelka. And the gush and chelka are defined in the tabu, in the registry of buildings, with exactly where it is, exactly its spot, but it's demarcation lines. So how do you know if you sold them one field or you sold them all the fields? Maybe he calls bika all the fields, and he calls sadeh. Even a stretch of fields is also called a sadeh. So maybe he sold them all the fields. Let's read it. Some people call a field and a bika. Some people call bika also a field. Now the same because I might think he sold the whole thing. Since again he should have written, but Rav Nachman's big finish is that the seller sells the least amount. Not like Rabbi Akiva that he's very generous, but also you sell the minimal amount. Since he should have written in there, if he wanted to sell everything, just like at the house, or selling the whole, if he wanted to sell the whole stretch of fields, so he should have written in there, Lo Shairis Bezvina, I have not left over in this sale, Elaine, in this sale, Kadami, for me, Klum, I haven't left over anything. If he owned all the fields, obviously if he didn't own them, he couldn't sell them. But if he owned all of them, and he sold them his field, and the field could mean all the fields. But since he didn't write those words, I'm not leaving over anything for myself. Allah Kasvay didn't write that. Shmami, no, we see from your Shiur Mishayra that he left over something himself. Now, why do you have to tell me this Kiddush, both in the case of the house within a building and a field within a stretch of fields? Just tell me the basic idea that you sell the minimal amount. Even though you maybe the map showed a lot more territory, but if I didn't write the words, I'm not leaving over anything for myself. I didn't say that. That means I'm leaving over stuff for myself. I only sold you the minimal amount. What's the minimal amount? The apartment? That's it. I'm just selling you the minimal amount, not the side room, not the storage room, not the roof. Those things aren't included. But why do you have to tell me this whole thing? Rav Meir Shapiro said the same thing. When you sell an apartment within a big building, or you sell a house within a stretch of fields, you're only including the house or the stretch of fields. Why do Rav Meir Shapiro have to tell me both? If you tell me the house, you could argue, you could say, you know what, you know why the storage room is not included, right? Maybe we said before that the side room is not included. The side room is not included if it's 4x4 because it's an independent structure. But what about the back room? The finish of the back room is the storage room that even though he included in the perimeter in the way he drew the diagram. So why do you have to tell me both? If you tell me they can have separate usages, as the house is one usage and the storage room is another usage. In the case of Bika, the kulachara tashmishi, they're all the fields used for the same thing for growing crops. And I might think there he meant to include the whole thing. He meant to include all the fields if he owned them. He meant to include all of them, even though he didn't include the words. And I'm not leaving over anything for myself, since if he says I'm not leaving over myself, even though he didn't include those words, maybe he included everything because they all have the same usage. Kamashma, no, we don't say that. That if he didn't use the words, I'm not including everything. It means I haven't left over. If he didn't play words, I haven't left over anything for myself. That means he is leaving stuff over for himself. That's the chiddush in the case of the field. Yashmin and Bitcoin, if you tell me the case of the field, it's hard to draw. How do you draw a diagram of the fields? You know, it's like one big stretch of fields. There's nothing to show. In the case of a house, you could show a picture of a house and rooms around it, but it's hard to show that in the case of a field. Because it's hard to draw it. So he should have been more specific with his drawing, and he didn't draw it properly. He didn't, so to speak, set off the house from the storage room. Maybe meant to include everything. He should have been more specific in his diagram. Therefore, he's teaching me that in both cases, whether it's a house, whether it's an apartment in a building, or a field within a stretch of fields, if he did not include the words, and I'm not leaving over anything for myself, that means he is leaving over stuff for himself, and he's only selling him the minimal amount, one field and the one apartment. Kamanos lahod Rav Mori. Who is the following go like this? Rav Mori said, brother Shmuel, the son of the daughter of Shmuel. All right, daughter of Shmuel, famous story with Shmuel's kids that were taken captive and they got impregnated. Not by the goyim, but they got impregnated by some sperm in a water bath or whatever, and so therefore Rav Mori was the son of the daughter of Shmuel, Shmuel's daughter. Just who is this from? If you sell somebody else, if you sell some property, somebody you have to write in it Lo Shairis Bezvine Alain. I've not left over anything in this sale. This transaction, Kadami 3 Klum, I've not left over anything myself. Come on, Rav Nachman Ravua. That goes like Rav Meir, who basically, that member is the same thing as Rav Nachman Ravua. That when you make a sale, you're only selling the minimal amount unless you specifically use those words. I'm not leaving over anything for myself. Now we have a story. Reuben said to Shimon, Ara de Beichia, I'm selling you the land of Beichia, the land of the house of Chia, or the yeshiva of Chia. I'm selling you. Avilei Tarti Arasa. Now he had two pieces of land. He had two pieces of land that were called the house of Chia. Two pieces of land. And he sold them one piece of land. Ara is one land. Arasa is two. It's multiple. It's plural, multiple. So he sold one. Amar Rav Ashi, Chada Amarle, he only sold him one. Tarti Lom, he didn't say two. So he only sold him one. Which one? Presumably, it could be up to the seller to say, this is the one I meant. Tarti Amarle, Chada Amarle, Tarti Lo Amarle. He sold him one, not two. The Amarle Arasa, let's say he said lands with an S at the end, plural. Then he takes out the word stamba. The Niyad Arasa Shtam, the minimal amount of lands is two. Minimal plural is two. So if he sold, I'm selling you the lands of Chia, then both are included. The Amalei Kol Arasa, if he said all the land, then Kol Arasa this way, it means all the land that he had. Not only, let's say he had several pieces of land that were called the land of Chia. Maybe the Chia had once owned some of this land and still went by his name. Someone still called that land. Like you have that in many cases where it's called the estate of this name, even though it's generations later, owned by different people, but it's called by that name. So if he says, I'm selling you land of Chia, that's only one. If he says lands, it's two. If he says all the land, then all the land that he has, excluding gardens and orchards. That's not called land. Land means land for regular crops, but it excludes gardens and orchards. If he said all, ziyar means all karka, all real estate. It's like all real estate. Afilu bustini pradise. Even the gardens and the orchards are included too. Labar mitbate ba'avdi, excluding houses, the apartments, and slaves. Even though houses are also part of karka, and slaves are dumya karka or nimshal karka, so therefore they're juxtaposed with karka, and therefore many halachos of avodim knanim are like karka. But if he said zira means karka itself, means land, not including houses and slaves. The amarle on the top of Semper, the amarle nechasai, my assets, afilu bate be'avdei, right? Even the houses and slaves are included as well. Abu Matalfa says, Rashba Matalfa lo adamarle kol nechasai. So it depends on his words. If he says, I'm selling you land means one piece of land. Lands means at least two. All the land includes all his real estate, all his crop, land that's used for crop growing. That means all that, excluding gardens and orchards. If he said zira, all my real estate, zira is like kol karka, all land that I have, then even gardens and orchards, not including houses and slaves. If he says my assets are including houses and slaves. But if he says all of his assets, then he includes also even the taltlin. All right, tomorrow's daf is daf samach beis, and we'll pick it up tomorrow with all these various structures. If you want to prepare in advance and memorize all the structures, it'll be easier tomorrow. So have a good day. Shavua tov. Yeah, what? Yeah. Right. No, but that's not the, let's say there's Adam to it, or even if he writes it, it could be it's not just verbally. If he writes, he says all my land. Well, what does that include? It could be that it's written down. In the deed, he writes all my land, or my lands, or the land of Chia, or he says my assets. I'm selling you my assets. So the assets include his houses and his slaves too, not his movables, not his car and his keys and stuff like that. It says all my assets. That's everything. Shavua tov.
Okay.